Good afternoon. I'm Kim Churches, CEO of AAUW. I'm delighted so many of you are joining us today for a very special webinar on the status of Latinas in the United States. This is a brand new project for AAUW and one that should have been a part of our repertoire of research, policy and advocacy and our programs for far, far too long. And I'm really proud to announce this webinar today as an inaugural one, not one and done, but for a lot of work ahead for us to be doing. We know how fast the Hispanic population is growing in the United States. And for US Latinos, the question of identity can be very complex because of diverse cultural traditions and countries of origin. We all know, even though political pundits may have just figured out that Hispanics are not homogenous or a voting bloc in any way. But the fact is that the US Hispanic population reached 60.6 million people in 2019. And of that 60 plus million people, a third are immigrants, a third are second generation and US born, and the remaining third belong to third, fourth, or higher generations. That is, US born to US parents. So why the Latina Policy Initiative at AAUW? Really because AAUW is bolstering racial equity in all of our work. And our racial equity work has to happen as we're thinking about education and workforce development training for the jobs of the future. It has to happen as we're talking about economic security issues, as we know that our Latina sisters are paid far less than white women for equal pay for equal work in this country. And as we think about the leadership gap of where we can see it and be it, and see women representing this wonderful country we all love. And frankly, because when we talk about only talking about all women, that really defaults to dominant white culture. And if we're going to really bolster racial equity, we have to be talking about the lived experiences of so many, and hence the Latina Policy Initiative. So what can I tell you that we'll be doing? Well, one, you're hearing a preview today from my wonderful colleague about the status of Latinas and a new brief that will be due out later this month or early December. So please do watch your emails for the announcement of this important research and policy brief. We're going to be focused on groups in key states where Hispanic population really are residing so that we can gain more knowledge about the status of Latinas. So we'll be focusing in Arizona, California, Colorado, Florida, Illinois, New York, and Texas. And we'll be working with our AAUW affiliates, our branches and state affiliates, and other partners to help recruit participants. But in addition to kind of macro level data and analysis on the status of Latinas, it's really important as well that we get the stories behind that data. So we'll be publishing firsthand accounts of Latinas and their experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic and their aspirations and hope as we come out of this terrible, terrible time. We'll be developing a policy agenda for Latinas with specific policy recommendations at the municipal, state, and federal levels, addressing the economic, education, and health needs of Latinas based on all this focus group data that we'll be collecting. And as you can imagine, and those of you who have already been a part of our AAUW advocacy team will definitely have a strategy towards advocacy targeting the new Biden-Harris administration and the 117th Congress. But right now, it is my deep, deep honor to introduce my friend and our colleague and partner in this project, Iracema Garza. She's working with us now in such important ways to make sure that we're illuminating and keeping the spotlight on the status of Latinas in the United States. Iracema is an attorney with a long and storied career in very senior positions within 2 federal administrations at the U.S. Department of Labor and in the nonprofit sector. She's based here in Washington, D.C., and works as an independent consultant, providing clients with strategic advice, policy and legal analysis, across a wide range of issues. In the Clinton administration, she was nominated to serve as the 14th director of the Women's Bureau within the Department of Labor, the only federal agency office mandated by Congress to represent America's wage-earning women in the public policy process. After she received unanimous Senate confirmation, Iracema set to work ensuring that economic security of women was a policy priority for the Department of Labor, and she established many innovative programs that expanded the reach of the organization beyond U.S. borders. She's also served in her career as president of Legal Momentum, the Women's Legal Defense and Education Fund, and so many more roles. She's indefatigable, and I am so honored that she's able to join us today. Irasima, thank you so much for all of your important work and for joining us at AAUW in partnership on this initiative. I'd like to kind of start on this, just given your history working towards closing so many gaps on gender equity issues, what really leads you to focus on Latinas right now?
Well, first of all, Kim, thank you so much for the opportunity to work with you and AAUW. It's been a wonderful experience, and you're right, this is work that's very much necessary, and particularly right now. So as you mentioned, one of the things that I think cannot be overstated is the size of the Latina population and their relative youth. So over the last couple of decades, the Latino population has just exponentially grown. Today, 18% of the female population in the United States is Latina. By 2060, it is projected that 1 out of every 3 Latinas in the United States is going to be Latina. But importantly, right now, in places like Texas, in California, 50% of the female student population is Latina, 50%. So this has like very significant ramifications for our country. So let's look at the age. If you've got the slide in front of you, so the median age of Latinas is like 30 years old. So we compare that to white females, which is around 44, age 44, so about a 14-year difference. But if you look at the slide that's right in front of you, if you look at the first grouping of age, you can see that Latinas, 34% of Latinas under the age of 19, they're under the age of 19. So, and if you look at the last grouping, we can see that only 9% of Latinas are 65 age and over. So it just gives you a snapshot of the relative youth of the Latina population. So again, huge implications for our workforce and our economy. Why? Over the last 20 years, or during the last 20 years, the Latino workforce participation rate doubled to 58%. And this is sort of a trend that's expected to continue through 2060. At the same time, let's just compare it to white, non-Hispanic female population, which the rate of labor participation for that group has been slowly declining. Why? Because we have the baby boom population, and they are exiting the workforce. So as the workforce gets, ages, then young Latinas are coming in and replacing some of those jobs. Huge for the labor force. So in addition to that, in addition to Latinas being critical to replenishing the labor force, Latinos in 2018 contributed $2.6 trillion to the US economy. Incredibly significant. That is larger than the gross domestic product of Brazil and twice as big as the gross domestic product of Mexico, just to sort of give you an idea.
Yeah.
And Latinas have huge influence as to where and how that money is being spent. So let's keep all of that in mind. So what this picture tells us, we've got huge and growing population, very, very young, and contributes an enormous amount to the US economy. So what that tells us is that the US economy and Latinas are interconnected. The economy needs Latinas to succeed, and to succeed, Latinas need policies to address significant pervasive socioeconomic challenges that remain. So Kim, we've known for a long time that that generally, right, the more education a woman has, the higher her earnings, and the less chance that she's going to end up unemployed. That is a given. Yet what's really troubling is that Latinas lag far behind African American women and white women on education attainment. Latinas, although they've made these great strides in education over the last couple of decades, but to this day, still, only 73% of Latinas graduate from high school.
Wow.
It's more than 25% of Latinas continue not to finish even high school. And white women are twice as likely to attain a bachelor's degree as compared to Latinas. So I want to run through some of these statistics just quickly because I want the audience to have an opportunity to ask questions and converse with us. So one of the major challenges Latinas have is that they experience this disproportionate levels of poverty. 18%, they're 18% of the population, but 27% live at poverty level or below. And if they're heads of household with children, that number jumps up to 31%. It's very significant. The wage gap, you mentioned it a while ago, that Latinas have some of the, there's the biggest wage gap. They only earn 55 cents to every dollar that a white male earns. Latinas also tend to be occupationally segregated. They're much more likely to work in low-wage service-type occupations. In 2019, 25% of Latinas worked in service jobs, and they earned, get a load of this, only $12 above the poverty line. That's 25% of Latinas. Only 19% of Latinas in the United States had professional jobs that were in the various professions. Now, this year we've had this the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and that has exposed significant disadvantages. It just sort of peeled back just how large those disadvantages were for Latinas. More Latinas have lost employment due to COVID than any other group, 21%. And they were hit, why? Because they work in service occupations that were particularly hit hard by the pandemic. We're talking about hotels and leisure industry and those sorts of occupations. At the same time, Latinas have also experienced a greater number of deaths because of COVID. Why? Because they're essential workers. If we look at agriculture, for example, who is picking our crops and feeding the United States? Latinas. Who is working in meat packing, in the meat packing industry that was designated as essential by the President of the United States? Latinas. Okay. And Latinas are the least likely among all groups to have any type of health insurance. And I wanted to mention this too, Kim, because I think this is really important. And that is our documented sisters, undocumented sisters, Latinas. Those are the ones most likely to be working in agriculture and out in the fields and just being impacted by COVID. And yet the economic stimulus package that was passed earlier this year excluded undocumented people from receiving any of those benefits, again, even though they're the ones that are feeding us in the United States. So that sort of gives you, I mean, we could talk about any one of these and of any one of these statistics, right, and for an hour or so, but I want to have more opportunity to to be able to answer questions that people may have.
Super. And I'm putting up a couple more slides we have here too, because we just had the COVID-19 impact on Latinas. And this, you heard Irasama share a little bit about workforce participation, but I think this slide really illuminates occupational segregation and where Latinas are in some of the occupations most impacted during this really difficult time, and see the overrepresentation in service occupations. And I think I'll just leave it on this last slide here too, because you noted this in the beginning. But it's not just about equity, as you and I have been discussing. It's also about our economy, right? And I think it's just so critical that we kind of close out just as a reminder about this contribution of $2.6 trillion.
Absolutely. It's no longer about, equality. Never mind, that's a central principle of our Constitution, right? What we're talking about right now is economic imperative, right? Because that has significant implications for our economy going forward. So yes, thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing a lot. I know that we've given the audience today a lot of information already, and we'll move into kind of a fireside chat so we can talk about some of the individual practices, educational, employer, and really importantly, what policy solutions can be. And I'm mindful too that I want to thank Geico for their support of this program and of our webinar series to really illuminate some of the issues like the status of Latinas that we're talking about today. But Irasama, let's talk a little bit about some of these startling statistics. And if we know that Latinas represent the largest female minority group, and we know we're going to have to fill a lot of retiring baby boomers pretty quickly.
Absolutely.
Here. So what policy actions do we need to ensure Latinas are positioned to contribute to, and not just contribute to, but finally maybe benefit from this economy if we make those right policy changes?
Absolutely, Kim. So the very first thing that I think from my, personal opinion is that we need something that's very short term. Mm-hmm. People are suffering, as you know. Latinas have been particularly hit hard during this COVID, this pandemic period of time. And our undocumented, sisters working in essential jobs have gotten no economic relief from our national government. So I think that that's really important, and it's just Latinas, but all workers and all people. We need to get help out there to people that are having a very difficult time right now. Longer term, I think we need a very comprehensive policy framework that's going to address like the systemic ethnic and gender workplace discrimination and disparities in the workplace. I think that that's going to be like very, very important. I think we also need like family-friendly policies, paid leave. We want to make sure that working women are able to get, and Latinas are able to take a sick day and get paid for it, and not have to go into work ill or leave a child at home that's not feeling well, etc.
Would you add to that, in addition to paid leave, fair scheduling and
absolutely
flexibility and schedules? Yeah,
more fair scheduling. Latinas are the least likely, and why they continue to work a lot of times, right? Because they're the least likely to have those sorts of benefits at work. And so the consequence has been what? They've been exposed to COVID. They're the ones that are getting, sick and unfortunately losing their lives. So yes, very important. And then it's just time to make sure that everyone has access to affordable healthcare, Kim. I mean, that is just going to have to be something that's important going forward. As I mentioned earlier, Latinas are the least likely of all the groups to have healthcare. And health insurance. And if you don't have health insurance, might as well not, you don't have access to healthcare because people cannot afford it. So that's really important. And then because we still have to go through this period of time right now where many of our sisters are working and earning minimum wage. We need to raise the minimum wage. I mean, that's just fair. People need, and Latinas need to be able to feed their children. But we also have to change this occupational trajectory for Latinas, right? And not going into these low wage occupations, right? We need to give them an opportunity to do better. And so one of the things that we need to do is our country needs to substantially make investments, both private and public, that would allow us to narrow the education gap for Latinas and to be able to provide them with access to like skill-based training, which is one of the things that you and I have talked about, and to prepare them to be able to take those jobs of that are going to come up in the future, and that they're going to be the ones that are going to have to step in and replenish those jobs as our workforce ages. And again, this isn't like a favor or from an equality standpoint, although that would be really nice if our country did that too. But this is to keep the U.S. economy strong and growing and globally competitive. So, it's an economic imperative, not a moral imperative, if you don't want to look at it that way.
Yeah, it can be both, right?
Or it'd be great if it could be both. But sometimes mentioning one may not get us as far as emphasizing, the economic benefits to the country. But yes, you're right, both.
Well, and when we're, exactly as you've just been saying, without health insurance, without access to quality health care, we saw in that earlier slide just the dramatic mortality rate for Latinas during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is dramatic and terrifying. And even as we look at exactly as you're talking about, as bringing in new folks into the workforce as folks move into retirement, we know, and it's very clear that Latinas have made great strides in education. More have college degrees. Many are seeing better employment opportunities. But that overrepresentation of Latinas in certain employment sectors reflects on their income. And you're right, there are still so many states that haven't, and federally, we have to do so much on raising minimum wage. We know that Latinas earn, about half of what the average white man earns in a dollar. So how do we think about that too, as we think about educational segregation, educational access, and as it leads into the workplace? You mentioned some things on workforce development and skills and reskilling and the like. How can we think about that through a policy lens and particularly to benefit Latinas and exactly as you said, benefit the economy?
So, one of the things that, and I'm sure you and I've had this conversation, is college degrees are fabulous, and we all want our children to have access to go to a 4-year institution and to do that. But as our economy is changing and going into a more sort of information knowledge-based economy, we're going to need all sorts of people to step up and learn and get those skills. And we need to make that available. There are many, many community colleges. There's the Department of Labor. There's all sorts of programs that that could be well funded to be able to give Latinas an opportunity to do that. And here's another thing: how about the private sector also getting involved in doing very sort of targeted investments in communities where to educate more Latinas and to give them opportunities in the private sector to be able to move up and to do well. I hope that answers the question that you're talking about, but there are so many ways that we can make sure that Latinas are not just are in occupations that pay the least and that have no real opportunities for growth and promotion. Right. But I think education is the key, Kim.
Yeah, I would agree with you totally. And I think that network, as we're looking at education and at skills and training, we've got to better develop the network in those cities and areas where perhaps there are programs that are working well to really create a spider web network around the nation so Latinas can thrive throughout, right? And we need more of those
Absolutely, and we need to marry that with like what the private sector needs, right? If the private sector in a particular region um, has a certain skills deficit, then those are the things we need to pair that with educational institutions and give people in those communities the opportunity to gain those skills to be able to fill those jobs.
That's right. So this year, 2020 feels like it's 5,272 days long, right? We know
Absolutely.
that we're all looking forward to turning the page into 2021 and starting to get to thinking more dramatically and acting more dramatically towards economic recovery and human recovery as we continue in the COVID-19 pandemic. Because the virus has had such a devastating impact for communities of color, and certainly, as you've already described, Latinas are no exception. So you and I are talking in coalition and with a lot of our colleagues and together about opportunities and challenges ahead at a federal level for the administration to effectively address the needs for COVID relief. We need immediate relief right now. But what are some of them, if you were able to whisper in the next administration's ear and give them 2 or 3 things you'd like to see immediately happen as we think about specific to COVID relief, what would you suggest? And let's hope that we make it to 2021, right?
So one of the very first things that first of all, any COVID relief that comes through on a short-term basis or long-term basis has to include undocumented women. It just that's a human thing to do. We can't continue to look at it as political or issue. So that is one, and I have great faith that the incoming administration will absolutely promote that, and that maybe the Congress will go along with it. But the other thing that I think is going to be really necessary as they come in is we need to make sure that people and Latinas have access to health care. I think that is, I think that this administration or the incoming administration has talked about strengthening the Affordable Care Act. Whatever it is, we just need to make sure that that's going to happen. And it's sort of a very complicated thing with the exchange, as you know, the Medicaid exchange policies and some of the states that didn't adopt it, et cetera. We need to step in as a country into those states. Did you know that in Texas, for example, 25% of the female childbearing year population has absolutely no insurance, zero. I mean, that is a huge part of Latinas and about other females. I think that one of the other things that we need to do is move in right away are family-friendly policies. The economy is absolutely going to be devastated going forward if women continue to exit, because there's a group of women that is very rapidly leaving the workforce because they cannot be able to take care of their children at home with COVID, and because where they are working they don't have family-friendly policies. So I think that it is incumbent about any administration coming in to make sure that we put those sort of family economic benefits in place as soon as possible.
Yeah, I mentioned to you that I was on a panel earlier today really talking about what we used to call work-life balance. And for the 70% of us that are able to work from home, there's only 70% of us in this country that have the privilege of being able to work safely from home. But it's really not about balance. It's about blend, right? That we don't just have one place that here we're working and then here's our personal life. It really is a blend. And family-friendly doesn't mean a lack of return on investment for employers. And by the opposite, it means less attrition, greater productivity, right? And then in turn, better ROI at the end. And I agree with you that that's got to be something that's got to be high up in this next administration as we move into 2021. Otherwise, we're going to continue living out of a 20th century model of how people work, right?
And there is no way that you're going to be able to, they're going to be able to bolster, right, the numbers of young Latinas, right, that are young, educated Latinas that need to come into the workforce to take over the jobs where, aging workers are leaving without those sorts of policies. And again, it's an impact on, sure, there's impact for the family, but the economy will suffer if we don't rectify some of these situations at work and promote family-friendly policies.
I agree. Well, as we get ready to publish together the status of Latinas brief later this month and early in December, and then as we start to work in some of those core states we talked about, working with the focus groups and with our affiliates and the like, as we partner together more on this to really highlight the unique needs of Latinas, what do you hope that we achieve, out of this in just the first year, or maybe in the second year as well? How will our efforts really compel action, do you think? What are you most excited about in this initiative?
I'm very excited about this initiative. One of the things that was really of concern to me when I came to AAUW with this project, and you and I started discussing this project, was the lack of research and information on Latinas. And I am very grateful that this has given us an opportunity, right, to dig deeper and to learn more and to publicize what actually is what the Latina population looks like in the United States, and why it's important that they not continue to be an invisible constituency, if you will. I have said for years that we at best are like a footnote in any policy considerations in DC, even though, or in the policymaking process, even though we're almost 20% of the population. So just highlighting that is very important. As you know, we can provide this information to our policymakers. We can do that. But the one other thing that's so important, Kim, I think is going to be, is the stories that we are collecting from Latinas across the country. We know that putting a face to some of these numbers can be, quite significant, because I think that it really moves people. It gives us a different feel for what is going on. So for me, I think that this opportunity to do this type of research, to highlight this type of research, to get these stories together, is going to give us and putting together policy recommendations is just going to give us a better opportunity to advocate, to lobby, right? To be able to lobby and do advocacy on their behalf. Research, policy, advocacy is absolutely necessary to be able to make changes at the policy level.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, as we've talked about, the time is now. It was yesterday, but it's assuredly now and tomorrow, because of what this pandemic has shown us on the effect on women and definitely the effect on our Latina sisters. So I'll just tell our audience again, just remind that as we release this brief later before the end of this calendar year, we'll then be working on these focus groups in key states around the country. But then as we develop this policy agenda, I want to be really clear. It's not just about pre-K through 12 education. It's about associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, graduate degrees. It's about workforce development. It's about CTE and apprenticeship programs to move into higher paying jobs, whether that's advanced manufacturing or engineering, right? And it's also about addressing a lot of the economic policies that are helping to keep right now Latinas down, rather than affording them the opportunities to be able to flourish in our economy even more so. And just as Irasima has said, the healthcare needs must be addressed with this incredibly important and growing demography. And in addition to that, there's a couple questions in the Q&A here that I'd like to go to if you're good with that, because there's a lot of questions about
Sure.
how AAUW can get more involved in our schools to encourage and support Latinas getting further education other than scholarships. We know that mentorship and sponsorship programs are really important. We also know for a lot of girls and women, it's hard to be it if you can't see it. So how do you think, as we're working together in analyzing the research and really working to pull together these stories together that will illuminate it so we can push more on federal and state policies, what sort of programs do you think, you've been studying these issues for a long time, that maybe some of our AAUW affiliates might want to tap into in their own communities to help? What sort of programs, as we think about healthcare, education, and workforce, should we be thinking about in this Latina initiative?
So, the one thing that I always think about is because it's meant so much for me is education, and how is it that we support these young women to just give them the tools and the support and necessary to be able to finish, even like, let's start at the very beginning, high school. So mentorship programs, for example, there are, as you probably know more about the education piece than I do. We need to make sure that parents also, we can teach parents how to be better teachers at home, if you will. If you are a woman that's earning minimum wage, you've got 3 children, you're single, it's very difficult to spend the appropriate amount of time, if you will, to support your children that are going to school. So how, I would think about things like that. How do we support those women that are going through that? In fact, how do we support her to be able to get like some better training and better opportunities for better work? I don't remember the rest of it.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. So let me ask you one more question, because I see one on here as we're collecting stories of Latinas around the country. And a question here is, how can we make sure and secure the stories for our research in this work and storytelling among undocumented women when deportation hangs over their heads? And I can imagine we can use some anonymity there, but how will we be addressing that in this work of gathering these stories, Erasima?
And that's exactly right. We have offered them anonymity. We have told them that they do not have to, we won't have to use their names. We don't have to do anything. We want their experiences. And so far it has been okay. I mean, I've been able to talk to them, and yes, absolutely, we would never do anything that would harm them. And one of the things that's really important that, that, for example, Leticia Bustillos, who's on your staff and my colleague in going through this, is gaining the trust of women in these communities. And I don't want to say a whole lot, but the one thing that I do want to share with you, it is amazing, the leadership among Latinas in the community have absolutely the most difficult economic time, and yet they are out there day in and day out doing whatever they have to do to be able to lift other sisters and help the community. It's just sometimes it makes me cry, but at the same time, I just love their strength. I wish I want at least a quarter of the strength that these women demonstrate when I speak to them.
Yeah, beautifully put, beautifully put. So there's a question here about public education and improving the graduation rate for Latinas. And I want to reiterate what we talked about at the very beginning here, just as we think about the large demography of Latinas in this country, and the large amount, the higher percentage of under the age of 19. But I also want to reiterate that makeup of a third are immigrants, a third are second generation, meaning U.S. born, and the remaining third are third, fourth, or beyond higher generations, U.S. born to U.S. born parents. So as we think about public education now, and maybe put it through a policy lens as to how you'd make recommendations on educational policy here, because the question here is what needs to change in public education to really improve graduation rates of Latinas. Any thoughts on that?
Well, the very first thing, I know that it's important to break it up that way, but I wanted to just let our audience know something that I think is really, really significant, because I don't think people realize that 80% of Latinas are U.S. citizens.
Right.
And if they're under the age of 18, 94% of them are U.S. born and U.S. citizens. And I think that that's really important to remind our audience, and partly in part because of the sort of the political influence that Latinas will have generations to come. I think there's 1 million Latinos, so 500,000 Latinas turn 18 every year. That's really, really significant. So my area of expertise is labor and work, and it's not really education, but right, there's lots of, our public schools, as you can see, need help. And a lot of times the way that school is funded, right, it's tax-based. I don't know if we'll ever change that. The Supreme Court turned that down in 1975. But many of the places where young Latinos go to school are, very poor schools, very poor areas. There's something to have to be done there, but I'm not an expert in trying to figure that out. But the one thing that I do know is that for years, right, the trend was sort of to blame the community and to blame, Latinos for sort of the deficiencies of public education. And that is, I think that trend is changing, and that there's many more programs that are supportive of Latinas in school. And as a consequence, we no longer have 50% attrition rate in high school, Kim, which was the fact not that long ago. So, again, I'm not an education expert. I am only repeating what some of my friends that like Leticia Bustillos and your staff know about this. And that is that we need to be more supportive, whatever that means, to bring in programs, et cetera, that can help young Latinas stay in school. We need to give them an incentive. We need to tell them why it's important. We need to make sure that at the end of the day, on the other side, there's going to be opportunities beyond what they see in their barrios every day, which is not much, right? And so there's no incentive to finish school. They're not going to do it. So we need to be better at that, and get into juvenile justice and all sorts of issues that are problematic. But this is not probably.
That's going to be part 2, 3, and 4, right?
Part 2, 3, and 4, yes.
So there's a really interesting question here about and I don't think we do have the data on this yet, but if we have any data on the effect of COVID-19 on Latina entrepreneurs. And there's been a lot of talk during the pandemic, about women business owners being impacted. We were talking before we started here that it's not just access to childcare, but that a lot of women start businesses that are care related, and how many of them have been impacted. But any thoughts on that, on either data or stories about the effect of COVID-19 on Latina entrepreneurs?
Absolutely. First of all, Latinas are very entrepreneurial. They were the ones that were growing small businesses at a faster rate than any other group in the country. I don't know if you knew that. That was sort of the trajectory for a very long period of time. And yes, they have been hit very hard, just the way small businesses have been hit. Little mom and pop shops in the community that, that sell milk or whatever it is that they do, those sorts of things. But a lot of Latinas have um, businesses like, restaurants, or I mean, all sorts of things within the community. And what I am finding is they are the movers and shakers when it comes to creating these businesses, and they have been greatly impacted. And I'll tell you just one brief story that I have found out was a woman whose family had the only restaurant in this very sort of rural area, and this is part of our research, so I can. And they were decimated, right? They've lost like almost everything. So instead, what they did is they began to um, receive donations, ask for donations from the same sort of community. And what do is they cook every single day and they hand it out to people that are otherwise unable to eat.
Wow.
There is food insecurity in these communities beyond anything that anyone can imagine. It is so unfair. We live in this very wealthy country, and that these women are having to do that to be able to feed children in their communities because they don't have food. There's something very wrong with that. And those are the things when I was talking about immediately moving toward trying to solve as soon as possible.
Yeah, boy, yes, you are so right. So another interesting question is kind of, the division of church and state here. And as our work moves forward, is the role of religious institutions for Latinas being considered to be included in our work in any way? That's a question.
The role of religion.
Meaning in solutions for issues in education, in economic security, in leadership, and in healthcare, the role of religious institutions in Latinas' lives being considered as partners in this work.
Well, there's a difference between the role of church or religious institutions and sort of policy and government. Our constitution makes that very, very clear that we need to divide that for many reasons.
Yep.
On the other hand, right, churches and have play a really important role in some of these communities because they are the ones that provide food or provide other sorts of benefits for poor people and Latinas and everybody. We don't want to take that away. But that is not something I don't think that we've been focusing on. And I've not very much heard that from the women that I've been speaking to in some of the states that I'm working on.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you. There's a question here, too, about a concern that many Latinas enroll in private training colleges or private medical training colleges and career colleges. But because there's just simply not enough classes or programs offered through their local community colleges or local college campuses. But then the problem is, since they're in private colleges in that way, or worse, for-profit colleges, they're then saddled with so much debt even before they begin working. I mean, we know already from our own student loan debt research how women are so disproportionately impacted here. But how is that student loan debt crisis also playing out in your work in the Latina community here, and as we're thinking about this work together?
It's affecting Latinos, and Latinos just, as much, if not worse than the general population, right? Because we start from a premise where the parents there's just not money within these families. So they have to rely on loans and grants and things like that to go to school. And they end up with thousands of dollars. I am not, familiar again with training programs within and the availability or the number of classes that need to be made available. But those are things that agencies like the Labor Department that I worked for 10 years, I worked for both President Clinton and President Obama, have huge programs where they actually partner with or fund community colleges to be able to do that and to do those, to fund those sorts of programs and make sure that there's enough classes available to these communities. So that's certainly something that should be considered from a policy perspective.
Yeah, great. Well said. So let me just reiterate for those of you who maybe had to join a little bit late that we're talking about our brand new Latina policy initiative with the wonderful Irasima Garza, who is our partner in this work. We will be publicizing a new brief, The Status of Latinas, due out later this month or early December. But we're also beginning focus groups that you've been hearing Irasima talk about some of the stories she's hearing directly on the ground from women in Arizona, California, Colorado, Florida, Illinois, Texas, and New York. And there is an opportunity many of you have put into the Q&A box of what can you do in your local communities in some of these states. So stay tuned on that. My colleague Letty and I will be getting in touch as we're working on the ground here to make sure that we can get these firsthand accounts and start to do the storytelling, because as we've been talking about, the data is already compelling, but when you match that with personal narratives of what's really happening, it helps us all to really grasp the 360-degree picture of what we need to see to get to policy solutions and pragmatic solutions. As we
And
start,
more effective.
yeah, go ahead, please go.
No, I was just going to say, I think it makes us, it allows us to do better policy advocacy, to be able to take these stories along with these numbers to our policymakers and say, listen, this is what's happening to a huge, segment of our population, and you need to do something about it, if for no other reason, because our economy will depend on it if it doesn't already.
That's right. Perfectly put. So for all of you wondering about what you can be doing to help us in this effort, one, know that we'll be collecting these stories and publishing these firsthand accounts, so you'll get more information about how you and your branch or your state affiliate can be helpful in that. But two, I think this is really, really important. As we gather this information and we have this brief, we'll be developing, just as we've been talking about here, very specific public policy agenda that can really address it around at a federal level, state and municipal level, around the economic, education, and health needs of Latinas. And so that means you can help us to make sure that you can help AAUW in our advocacy strategy to make sure that we're marching into 2021 armed with the tools we know Latinas need and deserve in this country that will help not just them, their families, and also the U.S. economy. Irasima, before we close, one, I just have to say thank you. Really, thank you so much for your partnership in this, and a very hearty and special thanks again to Geico for their support of this webinar this evening. But any closing remarks you want to say to everybody on here as a reminder of our work ahead and the work to be done, or any note of optimism you might be able to share as we embark on this work together?
Well, first of all, let me say something to you. Thank you very much for the partnership and for just your commitment to make sure that the lives of Latinas, the lived experiences of Latinas, are brought, to the limelight. And we know that is generally, this research and information is what helps us move the policy needle, if you will, forward in a positive way. Just in closing, I just want to thank everybody that came here, Geico, and for their interest in this particular topic. It is an incredible opportunity for all of us to take this information forward and to be able to do whatever our part is to assist these women, particularly right now during the COVID pandemic time. But it's just my honor to be able to work on this. It's a privilege to be able to advocate on behalf of Latinas and to do it in partnership with you. So thank you all very much.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for joining us tonight for this important conversation. As a reminder, this is being recorded and will be available, including the slides, on our website in just a few days. And so do check back on the membership tab of aauw.org. And you can also find any one of our other really compelling webinars that we've been doing over these many months too. But do know that this is the first not the last, that we'll be doing in our initiative on the status of Latinas in the United States and what more we can do around education and training, economic security, and leadership opportunities for all Latinas. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope to see you on a future webinar. And please, please, as we enter the Thanksgiving holiday, wear your mask, stay safe, and be well. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.